Okay, Monica, you're saying you can't hear me? Okay, everyone can hear? Okay. Monica, are you trying to do it online? Oh, well, you're not going to hear me if I'm talking to you. Just a second here, guys. I'm going to type Monica a message.
Are you talking to me?
No, Monica.
Okay.
I'm going out and... Sorry, Anka. Okay, I was going to tell her what to do, and then I realized if she doesn't have sound, that's probably not the most intelligent response to that particular challenge. So we'll try and get her to log out and come back in. So for everybody else, if you can see my... I'll have to tell Monica to call Aaron. Okay, so what we're going to do, so when you're in your portal thingy, as you all know, I'm extremely technical. When you're in your thing with the beehives, is what I call it, within the RCD program, you see these little boxes, and those are your different classes. So the one that I was looking at, talking about to you today, was the consumer psychology section, which is this one here. So I'm going to actually open it up, and we're going to go through some of these things. Welcome, Leanne, and go through them together to see how you do it. So you've got your different modules within the course, and what I typically do with you guys is not to do the courses with you, because you're perfectly capable of doing them on your own, and I don't think that specifically adds value. What I've always done with you guys in the past, for those people that are new, and so for Bridget, who's in PEI and doesn't have this program, it doesn't really matter what we're in, because we're going to provide the high-level stuff here. So what I wanted to look at is my... Oh, it downloaded it for me. It's faster than I think. So there's a list of competencies, and what I've always found to be very effective when we've done this sort of workshop together, no matter where you are in your business, I found that the members of the office that are participating, they could have been licensed for a year, they could have been licensed for 10 years. They still get something out of this, because it's a refresher in the sense of things that we often are not doing or forgetting to do within our own businesses. So bear with me one second here. I'm going to make this section bigger so that we can see it. Can you guys all see the competencies here that I'm doing? Okay. Okay, so let me see who just arrived. Monica is there. Okay. So if we look at these and we talk about them, I think you're going to find it, really interesting in terms of a discussion. So the first thing that they're talking about is applying insight about consumer behavior to influence specific day-to-day selling, marketing, and negotiating activities with clients and customers based on knowledge of consumer psychology as a field of study. Clients, customers, consumers, types of consumers are key factors that influence the behavior and the buying decision. So it's a very long, wordy paragraph, but basically what we're talking about here is if we divide this up between buyers and sellers. So let's start with the psychology of a seller, and really making sure that we're really thinking about how we can be of value to our sellers, and what are the things that they're looking for from us, and are we actually providing these things to them, or are we going in with our own agenda and saying, this is how I do it, versus how can I be of service? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the seller's psychology, or the seller mentality is probably a better word, that we're seeing now. And for anybody that's been licensed any period of time, there has been some changes in it. Okay, so what are some of the things that you guys would say are your opinions about the mentality of sellers at this time. Okay, so my online people, I need you to jump in and participate here as well, please. So I'll start it off as an example, just to give you an idea of where I'm going with this. So now you may run into a seller who may feel they know as much or more than you because of their access to data. Would anybody else agree with that statement? Yep. I don't think I've ever seen people type so fast. Okay, so that's an example of a seller psychology, a seller mentality. So let's talk about that one, because I think it's a pretty big one, right? If you guys agree. Why don't HGTV, yeah. So what, are you guys okay if we talk about that one in particular for a minute? Yeah, okay. So Marc-Andre, you're my eyes if I'm not paying attention to the chat, if I have to see something. Thank you. So when we're dealing with the seller who really feels like they know it all, one of the challenges with that is how to add value to the data that you both share. And one of the big issues is they don't necessarily understand how to apply the data or how to extrapolate useful information from that data. They lump themselves in to larger categories is one of the biggest things that I've seen, okay? In the sense that, well, you know, I'll pick Halifax just as an example. In Dartmouth, you know, when I looked online, I read something that said that the market is up 15%, which is not true. But and so now you're telling me that my price of my house is only 2% higher than when I bought it 2 years ago, right? So part of that is making sure that we need to be more prepared than ever in actually understanding our data. So one of the challenges that we run into is that as realtors, when we're preparing to meet with sellers, assuming you have some form of consistent listing presentation, the first question that I would ask you is, have you actually updated your listing presentation to deal with the current consumer and their access to data? And I would argue that most people have not, okay? And that when we are going in, we're going in with this, well, here are your 3 comps for sales, and here are your 3 comps for expireds, and here are your 3 comps for actives, and you know, this is what this is telling us. And part of it is that we aren't going beyond the main data we have to actually create a commentary on the data. Am I making sense to people, right? Like we're just giving them data. Okay, well, they already in a lot of cases, they have the data. So the question is, why? Why am I, when I tell you this data, how do I convey this data to you in a way that it is different than what you think you can Google yourself or from a variety of different sites that might provide data? So, for example, if you are talking about you know, the features of your particular listing in more detail, and how do they physically measure up to the ones that they're coming back with, and if they're, so when they're saying that, you're also going back to say, okay, I understand that this is a piece of information you received. However, it may or may not apply to our specific scenario, because as you can see, the comparables that I have found are very particular to your property versus an overall general search. Sometimes they'll find the anomaly listing where it went for over asking or it went super fast, and they want to know if you're going to be able to do that. Bridget, I'm going to read your comment out loud in just 1 second so that we can also chat about it. And one of the things that happens is the inability for contextual context, contextual relevance of that property. So let's say there was this one property that went on and it was like a crazy, like it just went so fast and it seemed to be priced a bit low, but like really went fast, and then it looked like it went for over asking, so like, are you going to be able to do that for me? And you look at the listing and are able to determine that it was a foreclosure and it was priced below market, and that's why, and they don't have that data. So unless they're prepared to price below market, you can't say. Or maybe you have data and you have that one outlier that was really expensive or really cheap. And you can say, for example, we always recommend that you have some contextual conversation about the outliers, in the sense that, the one that went undervalued, in some cases, it could have been that somebody was in duress. They could have financial duress. They could have had emotional duress. There could have been a divorce, a death, a very quick relocation with work. And none of that information is reflected in the data. But it is so inconsistent, this particular number, that we almost need to remove it from our information that we have. Just like one that goes for a crazy high price, sometimes it's just that moment, the supply and demand and the universe lined up, and somebody actually paid that crazy number for that house. But there's no statistical basis to suggest that that's going to continue, or that that's going to be a pattern that we can count on. Does this make sense to everybody? So, Bridget, I'm just going to read your comment before I carry on. I sold a bank sale 2 years ago. Okay, I have to put my glasses on. For 106 and got them a great deal. The house is now relisted 164.5. The market still sees it as a bank sale, even though it is now owner occupied and over 25K of work has been done. 22 square foot home, private and beautiful. How do I take the public perception of the value now? It's priced with every other home using comparable sales in the last year sold. So my suggestion for that, and I welcome the input of the team, that's the point of this conversation, is, to me, it's going to be about how you market the home in that particular scenario, and say, maybe something like, they turned something into a gem, or they, whatever, took a duck and made it a swan, or whatever, I don't know, and, pride of ownership from this previously abandoned, bank repo home, and now, you'll see the pride of ownership. I really think it's a marketing answer there, Bridget, versus them not agreeing to price with you with respect to that. So that's a buyer consumer mentality, which we're not quite at yet. But I don't want to forget about your question. Does anybody else have any other suggestions for Bridget other than what I'm suggesting? Marc-Andre, hold on one second.
As a salesman point of view, if the way you're going to present your house, the picture, it's not right in the front door, it's a bank repo. It is a property, it's a house. So if the house can have that amount of money, because you do a lot of work, so nice picture, and be confident in your.
So again, it's a marketing answer. So it's not a black and white, Bridget, and I know that over there everybody knows everybody's beeswax even more than they know here. Which is a whole different conversation. But I really do think that that's a marketing thing. What I'm sort of focusing on right now is that when you're sitting with the seller and you're trying to price their house, they're basically telling you your job. And that's sort of the start of where we were at right now. So I think it's going to be about the communication of value. It's going to be, we had a conversation in one of our previous sessions about making sure that you're going into your listing appointments and you're dealing with sellers by providing and having more information than your competition. So one of them is, for example, making sure that you are having a conversation about the timing of how things will go, what their net proceeds are going to be, how they're going to get out of this house and into the next house, what type of mortgage do they have, what type of rate do they have, who are they working with, providing contextual conversations that go beyond the average realtor who just walks in and goes, 3 solds, 3 lists, 3 actives, 3 expireds, here's how I'm going to price your house. But to be providing additional value so that they clearly learn that in that with that mentality, that consumer mentality of DIY, that you are actually bringing more value to that meeting than simply just, here's the number. Now, it's not to say that their number is wrong or that the data they have is wrong. I'll give you another example, and this is on the buyer side, but it's actually connected to the seller side. And so, Leanne, I'm going to get you in just one second. I'm going to lose my train of thought otherwise. So I was working with a buyer several years ago who was basically working her analysis as if she was a seller in the sense of the research that she was trying to do on the purchase side. And so she was interested in purchasing a condo. So imagine she's a seller and she wanted to sell her condo, and she did research on condos in the area, and she came up with a cost per square foot average, and so then determined that X unit was then worth that. What she was not able to do, and this was like, this woman was like an analyst or whatever, so she was a challenge. And when I sat with her and went through this data, I was able to put a different contextual aspect on that data to say, for example, if you're comparing, you can't compare an average cost of condos per square foot because there's a different price per floor, there's a different price per square foot if there's a view, there's a different price per square foot if the building has a pool, if it has underground parking, if it has this. So you're very rarely comparing apples to apples. You're comparing 20 kinds of apples. Yes, they're all a condo, but it's not that black and white. And so I ended up re-breaking down the data back for her to show her that, you know, main level condos on average in this particular building sold for X, second floor sold for Y, blah, 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 and compared that to other similar buildings with similar amenities versus ones that didn't have the same amenity. And then we were able to see a pattern, and lo and behold, she thought I was brilliant. All I did was take the exact same data she added, but took it from a realtor's perspective instead of going, oh, the price per square foot for a house in Nova Scotia is X, which is basically what she said, which is, of course, ridiculous. And, you know, added the context. Oh, these are by water. Oh, this is in town. Oh, this is here. And so it's that ability to add that other layer to the conversation when you're dealing with the DIY consumer who believes that they know as much as you know. It's about you talking about different things such as, you know, mortgage penalties, the changes to the mortgage rules. When were they pre-approved? Do we need to pre-approve them again? Have they migrated their property? Do we have a plan, you know, to live somewhere? Are they qualified for bridge financing? What, you know, when you start to add those layers, then your development of your business with those consumers becomes much less about the pricing of the house. The pricing of the house is probably the easiest part of your job. Although, trust me, I do understand that there are definitely houses where you are literally scratching your head and you really have absolutely no idea what you're doing because it's just, you know, it's just one of those weird houses. But generally speaking, that's the easy part, right? Everything else we do after that's the hard part. So having that, showing and demonstrating your value with a consumer who believes that they know as much or can do our job is, in my opinion, a key way to build your business. And we need to make sure that our listing presentation has some capacity to cover those points off in order that you can demonstrate your value above the ability to just show up and price their house. Does this make sense to everybody? Okay, Leanne, I'm going to read your thing here. I'm currently working with a potential client, multi-bid. We both gave, oh, okay, this is a seller. Both gave the same price, but the potential client feels that they're right on their price. So they're going to try it by themselves first on their price. Then if after 2 or 3 months, I will get the listing. FYI, 2 months and no showings. And Leanne, I think that that's actually a really powerful statement. So one thing that I will add here is, and as a message, and if this is a tip that may help you close listings, I'm off into the weeds a little bit here, but Leanne, I can't not tell you because you brought that up. When you're having that consumer mentality conversation with the person who's considering doing a for sale by owner, one of the things that I would very strongly recommend to all of you that you bring up in your listing presentation when they say that to you as a method of handling the objection is to say that you're not sure if they are aware but that any home that is priced and is on the multiple listing service has commission buried in the value of the house. You guys getting what I'm saying here? So every single listing on MLS has commission in the price. So the sale price previously and the active price has factored in paying commission. If you are listing privately, I will expect to pay no less than 5% less than my nearest competitor. And there are, most appraisers will back commission out of the appraisal of a home that is sold privately. So you can ask whatever you want, but technically if it doesn't appraise for the amount that the appraiser agrees, because they're using our MLS data, then I expect to get a deal. If I'm a consumer and you want me to go and work with you as a private individual with no assistance from a professional, then I want a deal. Do not think you can sell your house privately at full retail value and pull the store out of the equation and ask that consumer to pay the same price. It's just a fact. Okay? So that has worked extremely well for me in the past, and it's not wrong. You know, why would I buy, if I'm going to go buy a car in Kijiji, I expect to pay less for my car in Kijiji. Welcome. No, don't worry about it. I expect to pay less for my car in Kijiji than I do if I walk into a dealership. Is that fair? So why, if I'm paying for sale by owner, would I pay the same price of a house that I would pay if I walk into the real estate store? So as a result, I expect a deal. And remember that every single, if that consumer who knows everything is pricing their house themselves off of data that they have access to, then they're pricing it off of houses that included commission. So that, and HST on the commission. So that number should be backed out, and that's what their house is actually worth if you sell it without services. Does this help you guys? Okay. Welcome. Okay, so Bridget, you have said, every client says to me, I'm not going to give it away. I use positive redirection to what has sold and other suggestions for the statement that works with this. That's true. And, you know, one of the objection handlers that I would recommend for that is, of course, you know, you're the seller. Under no circumstances would we ask you to give your house away. If we can't sell your house for X, whatever the bottom line is that you told them, then I'm not going to put my for sale sign up. I'm not in the sign installation business. That's not my job, right? I'm in the sold sign installation business. So I'm not really interested in having you give your house away because I really don't want you living in my basement. Now that's my personal style. Not everybody's going to do that, and I understand that. But, you know, part of it is, again, if we go back to trying to handle the objection of the consumer DIY mentality that they know more than you do, it's not about the pricing of the house. You can prove to them that your price is correct, in effect, if you prove other value in that listing appointment. So if you prove your credibility in other areas, such as we talked about, talking about mortgages, talking about pre-approvals, talking about the changes to the mortgage rules, migration, timing, bridge financing, inspection items, things you see that might become an issue on the listing of their house. I know you don't want to replace your oil tank, but we have to have a conversation about that, and I'm going to take it off your net proceeds because it's 16 years old, and that's going to be a problem. Or we have a 12-year-old hot water heater, or things like that that we know are going to be an issue. You can provide value and prove to them that you actually know what you're talking about without actually trying to push back on price. If you prove to the DIY consumer that you have your you-know-what together in other areas, by default, your price starts to make more sense. Marc-André has a question. Hold on.
A few times I realized that people say, my roof is new windows, so that should have price. And for me, this is maintenance. That will help to sell your house faster. but you cannot charge $20,000 or 50 because you have new windows and new roof also.
Yes, and I should know the name of that, but I can't remember what it is. We took it in all took it in our real estate course, but it's the whole idea that I spent $20,000 on my pool, and so I'd like you to increase the price of my house by $20,000. So, well, we all know that doesn't work. So we now have Sherry in the room. Welcome. So when you want to talk, Sherry, just let me know. I'll wander over with my Vanna mic. Everyone else is online. What happens in that circumstance? So when you're again trying to provide context again to what we're talking about, Sherry, just to give you, because she walked in later, is we're dealing with consumer behavior today, and we're talking about the first thing we started talking about before we got into anything else was the concept of I'm going to go on a listing appointment. I'm dealing with seller mentality of I actually know as much as you do, and I'm not really sure why you're here. So we're dealing with that. Okay. So the other piece of this is to look at the conversation of this information may not specifically add value, it may not add a dollar value, but the way that I would recommend that you handle that is in having the conversation of where this becomes more relevant is if you are a competition, let's say you have new roof shingles and new windows, and 2 of your 4 competitors do not, then we can, by default, and everything else is the same, we can be in the upper end of our maximum ratio. It doesn't mean I get to go into another whole other level, but we can now compete with the best of the best versus the bottom of the bottom. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So I can't remember what that thing is called. I should know. I could get out a licensing book, but direct value, I don't know, it doesn't matter. Anyway, but and then there's the conversation of, oh, I've put this kind of countertop in your vanilla house versus laminate countertop. Okay, well, it's still a $180,000 semi, whether you put flipping granite in it or not. That doesn't help me. So there's also the perception of what will have value to a consumer, and having those conversations with your seller about what a buyer's concerns are. The other thing that I would recommend is that when we're dealing with this is if you're providing some insight into the buyer mentality for your seller, for example, because you deal with buyers and you're aware of how limited their financial resources are. And unlike you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, when you bought your home and you put 25% down and you've been here for 50 years and you have RSPs and investments and et cetera, the average first-time buyer who is potentially going to buy your home is scraping and scrimping every last cent to come up with their 5% down payment. And mom and dad are probably helping them, and they have no savings, and they have no financial stability, and if we can get it to close, we'll be lucky. And so they don't have any money to fix X, Y, or Z. So if you're going to do X or Y repair, this is what I recommend you do, because they'll be happy to rip up the carpet, but they can't fix the roof, right? So when you're providing an insight into consumer mentality from the other perspective, again, you're reaffirming your credibility with that seller to elevate yourself above the human that is simply providing a pricing of their house. As I mentioned earlier, the pricing of the house is the simplest thing you do as an agent. Everything you do from that point on is where your expertise comes in. And as Leanne had mentioned earlier, very often you're going to get you should be, in my opinion, you should be within no more than $5,000 of each other as an agent. Sherry should be able to go in, I should go in, and Lee should go in, and we should all basically price the house the same. The house is worth what the house is worth, right? It's not personal. It's purely materialistic and statistical. There's nothing subjective about it. You should get pretty close to the same number from all of us. Then the question is when we're dealing with that, so if you state that conversation with a potential seller, then you're in a position to say, so that's the easy part. In determining whom you're going to hire, it shouldn't be on how they price the house. It should be on X, Y, and Z criteria. And you can define that criteria to the seller to say, for example, have you asked them how many homes they've sold? Have you asked them what's their past experience in life? There's a lot of other things that go beyond that. What is their plan? Do they have, are they part-time, full-time? Like, depending on what your selling propositions are, you can ask questions that sort of throw a gray light on some of your competition without actually saying it. Because what you're doing is you're making that consumer question, right? And there are things that, and if you provide them with questions to ask the next person they're going to interview, there's a huge power to that. I don't know if anybody's ever heard this philosophy before. But if you say to a seller, so Marc-Andre, you're my potential seller, and I say, you know what, this has been, wonderful to meet. They're like, well, we're going to meet with one more person or two more people. And you're like, great. I always encourage you to get another opinion. As a recommendation, you can do what you'd like with it. But as you know, we've covered a lot of material today. And some of the things that we've talked about include A, B, C, D questions. What is my, I don't know, let's say in my case, for example, how long have they been in the business? How many homes have they actually sold? Whatever the thing, whatever. So what percentage of listings do they get versus do they sell? Because lots of people are very convincing and can get their sign on the lawn, but they can't actually close the deal and actually sell the flipping house. So what percentage of their listings actually sell? What's their average days on market? What is the average percentage of asking price that they get versus the price that they list at? Because if I'm going to take your listing and I'm going to give you X price, but then I actually make you do 10 price reductions, then you know what, I didn't price your house right. So if you were to ask those questions to your competition, you would have sort of a criteria checklist in addition to feeling whether or not you trust that person and you get along and you're on the same page. But that would be a way to distinguish yourself from the person who might walk in and go, oh, I'm fabulous, I've had 1,000 listings. But then if you actually ask them how many, maybe 75% of them expired, so that's not going to help you, right? You have 100%.
When you're new like me.
When you're new like Marc-Andre.
I have nothing to...
Okay, so when you're new, thank you for bringing that up because we have lots of new people on the line. That's where the royal we comes into play, okay? The royal we, okay, is what my mother used to call it. Be like, oh, can we do X? And she's like, you mean we like as in me, right? So that's where you can say at KW, right? We have, and Linda has all the statistics, and our ratios will blow anybody else out of the market in terms of, our agents sell 2 times the listings or whatever it is, and, our average closing, we're selling at 98% of asking price, or what, I can't remember what it is. Linda has all those stats. You just have to decide what the questions are, and absolutely every question, the point being, here's the thing, it doesn't actually matter what the answer is to the other people, because I can guarantee you that if that seller asked Sherry, let's say Sherry's, my competition, and see, I'm prepped with this answer. When I went in to do your listing, I knew these answers. But now I'm the seller, and I ask Sherry this in the listing appointment, I can guarantee you she's not going to know the answer. She's going to be like, well, I think, like, they're blindsided. Yeah, they'd make it up. Yeah, but you're quick on your feet. But the average person, they're going to see an instant panic on their face, and then they're going to tell that they're starting to spin crap. Sorry. Okay? Because they're not, you were ready for the question. You gave the question. But now you're telling the consumer that these are good questions, and they go, oh, yeah, that's a great question. And then they go, and the next person has no idea this question is coming. Because if the average agent doesn't know how much they spend on their business, I can tell you the average agent doesn't know their ratios. So when they ask that question, you are now proving, because remember, we're trying to get around the, oh, I know more than you know. So if I have this conversation and I explain the difference between, convincing you that I'm fabulous and letting me put my sign on the lawn and put a lockbox on versus actually getting the job done and actually getting you your money in your pocket and moving you into the house, those are 2 different skill sets. They're 2 totally different things, right? Think of a timeshare salesperson. They're all very good at luring you in to go to the free weekend and to go to the lunch and then go to the seminar, but how many of them can actually close? That's like a listing. A listing is the timeshare presentation. Let me in, let me sit in your kitchen, I'm going to tell, and maybe you'll actually let me go on the free weekend, which would be putting my sign up. But then am I actually selling the condo or the timeshare? Very little. So that's, the goal is to control it. The goal is to be in charge of your listing appointment and in a way in charge of your competition, and they don't even know what's happening. And even if you're last at the end, let's say you're the 3rd one in, which can happen. I often sometimes I think I either want to be first or last. I don't want to be in the middle, right? So if I'm last and I say, so these are some of the points I might want to cover, whatever they are. Like I'm just giving you examples. You can come up with anything else. And if you said, I'm just curious, when you're making your decision, these are some of the things that I would recommend that you consider. And then they realize no one else talked about these things, no one else brought them up, and they don't know the answers to the other ones. So by default, you must be smarter. Okay? So when we're dealing with consumer psychology, you cannot go in there and say, I'm smarter than you, Mr. Seller, because they'll kick you out the door. You are smarter than them in this instance about this thing. I'm not saying you're smarter than them in life. I'm saying when it comes to what you do for a living, day in, day out, 40 to X amount of hours per week, I'm not going to talk about that part, you do know what you're doing. And if you're not the expert in that particular thing, you are surrounded with someone who can help you, okay? So you know what you're talking about, but how do we make them know we know what we're talking about without going, okay, seriously, you're an idiot, okay? We can't do that. So how do we do it? And sometimes it's by asking a lot of questions. The more questions you ask, the more they realize they don't know. The more layers you add that demonstrate the complexity of what you're doing. You're talking about mortgages, you're talking about all different aspects of it, timings, migration, new mortgage rules, schools, time, like blah, blah, blah. Now they're starting to go, oh, okay, this isn't quite as simple as I thought of walking out to the front of my lawn with a wood stake and a sign from Canadian Tire going, whack, 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 my house is for sale. You talk about appraisals, you talk about values, you talk about the market. When you're talking about those things, you are by default showing that your pricing is correct because you clearly understand what you're doing. So without having to argue with them about price. Now, from a consumer mentality point, Leanne, with yours, so one of the things that and this is a business decision that you need to make. There's not a policy, there's not a rule, it's a business decision you need to make, is when the seller does not agree with you on price, and they are wrong. And I mean, I'm not talking 5K wrong, I'm talking wrong. You need to make a decision as to whether or not you're going to be that realtor that lists it anyway, or whether you're going to stand your ground and say no. And that is a very hard place to get to. It is typically based on financial desperation. But the one piece of advice, if I can give to any of my newer licensed people online with me today, is to say, you'll only do it, I'm going to say 5 times. I won't say once because that would be a lie. You'll do it maybe 5 times. You will work your heart out to sell this magically overpriced house. You will open house it. You will advertise it. You will Facebook it. You will do all kinds of magical things. But it's an overpriced house, and everybody knows it's an overpriced house. And you will not sell this house. And when it expires, some other agent will go in and go, I don't understand how you priced your house at that point for that long. This is where we need to price your house. Clearly it didn't work, and clearly your agent was wrong. So I'm going to list it at, oh, guess what? The same flipping price that the other agent said from the beginning, and I'm going to sell it 3 weeks later, and you are going to be cranky when you see that sold sign go up. Does anybody online have had this experience? Kim's like, oh yeah. Okay, so
oh hell yeah.
So anybody who has been licensed for more than everybody's done this. Don't anybody tell me you haven't, because we've all done it. But you finally get to the point where you just say, I'm sorry, but I can't put my sign up and make a promise to you that I'm going to do something that I honestly don't believe I can do.
I've said to clients.
Well. Sherry's new to us.
I've said to clients before in that situation where they're like, oh, we've actually had clients say, well, can you please list it anyway, we want to work with you. And I've used the whole investment strategy to them and said, you're asking me to invest in something that I know I'm not getting a return on, because I'm going to put money into this listing.
Oh my God, I love it.
Yeah, so I guess my background being banking and stuff, I've taken a whole spiel about I'm going to invest my money in you, because that's what they're asking us to do at that listing. They're asking me to put money up front with no guarantee I'm getting it back.
Okay, that is brilliant. We're just going to patent her right now. That was phenomenal. Yeah, Kim, I'm going to get you to mute yourself again because I can hear you moving around.
Oh, sorry.
So I think that's a brilliant, and you have to get to a place where you're comfortable doing that. Now, let's say you wanted to list them at 219.9 and they want to go 224.9. Am I going to walk away over that? No, because I'm in the same grid. They want me to go to 234.9, we got a problem, right? But the one suggestion that I always make for people, if you do push your envelope with respect to the consumer a smidge, is when you sign the listing, pre-sign the price change form at the same time.
Exactly.
To say, here's the plan, we'll try it, we're pushing it, we're not wrong, but we're pushing it. We'll try it your way for 21 days, whatever. On day 21, we're flipping back down to my price. Please sign we're going to sign the listing and sign the amendment at the same time. Because they won't change the price later. It's very hard after because they see you working and they see you doing it and they get some showing, so why would they change the price? Okay? So that's a suggestion. So when we're talking to consumer mentality, the other piece of it is this, what's the word I want to use? This sense of deserving is the other way I'm going to put it. Like there's a really strong sense of entitlement, and it's all about what are you going to do for me, and and I'm not disagreeing with that because our role is to be of service. But ultimately, as Sherry put it, you are a business person, and this is a business decision. Your house is worth X or Y. This is what I provide. This is when I work. This is when I don't work. This is my plan if I'm away, et cetera, et cetera. And part of creating that, and the more, sometimes when we create those boundaries, we actually end up creating a stronger respect level that you actually are a professional. Because we're asking them to pay us as if we're a professional, but we don't always act as if we're a professional. Marc-Andre. I'm open.
Can we say when we're doing like a CMA, we want to know how much people are willing to pay for your house compared to how much they want? Like, yeah, maybe they want $350, but in the area, people pay $324.9.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I call it a reality conversation, but I have no filter, as you all are very clearly aware. You can say, I might be able to find the shiny human who has no sense of value and is prepared to overpay for the product, but the odds of that are slim, and the odds are it's not going to appraise out at that price anyway because the statistics don't support this. There's always one, and we talked about that, but maybe, but that's a unicorn. I've never seen one, right? So your style is your style, and that's great. If we're going back to the beginning part of this, is that there is the consumer behavior, the mentality of the seller is that they think when you walk in a lot of cases, they know as much or more than you. So how do we position you to be the experts that you are? So over the last 45 minutes, that's what we've been talking about, is how do we do that? Now, the same thing applies to buyers, okay? Because in so many cases, and I'm just actually going to catch up to my comments here, 1 second here. Okay, just bear with me here. I think you would agree that the clientele that we deal with are much different than the people who are looking for a couch on Kijiji. Well, I don't know if I actually agree with that, but we're selling a much more valuable product than the couch on Kijiji, whether they think it's more complicated. That's good. Walked away, love that, Bridget, right on. Emphasis how much time and energy and disappointment they feel. I think one of the things for the seller mentality is also demonstrating that for them this isn't emotional, no matter how much they think. And for us, it's our job to fight to protect them. And ultimately, something I've said, I'm sure Sherry said, and I'm sure several of the people online have said, I run a referral-based business. So my setting you up to fail doesn't help anybody, right? It just doesn't accomplish it. And I'd like to run into in the grocery store and not have to duck down the other aisle. That's not my goal, right? So, and people laugh, like you're going to add your own thing. But if I lie to you and tell you I'm going to do all these magical things, and then I run into you at Superstore, oh, I'm panicking. I don't know where I'm going to go. Okay, I don't do that. I don't ever want to have to do that. But you've seen people do that, right? So I don't want to avoid you at Walmart. Yeah, usually I'm not. Well, no, I don't care about that anymore. But because I'll tell you a funny story about that just really quickly. For years and years, my daughter and I used to do our big Christmas grocery shopping at like on the 22nd or the 23rd at like midnight because the grocery store is open 24 hours. And so we would go and there's almost no humans there versus 6 hours before they were lined up down and around the corner of the grocery store. I don't need eggs that badly. I'm okay. So we would go and of course, I'm wearing like yoga pants and like my hair, like I look like I just rolled out of bed because it's midnight and I'm in the grocery store. Don't I run into 3 sets of clients in the freaking superstore? Anyway, in all fairness, they look just as bad as I do. Oh, well, that's a whole other conversation. That's a whole different conversation. Okay, so now let's talk about the know-it-all buyer, okay, if we're okay with that. So again, buyers are online. They think they understand market pricing just as much as sellers. So how do we deal with that? So the first question that I would ask for everybody is, do you actually do a formal buyer consultation, or are you jumping in the car with buyers right away? I can't do a show of hands, but if Sherry jumps, Marc-Andre is new, so.
I usually know them.
Referral.
So I always feel like it's the best place to start because it's what they want. So I want to give them something. We all know that they want to look at houses now, right? I have a discussion about mortgages first, though. I won't take them until they're pre-approved.
Okay, so they are pre-approved, but you haven't necessarily had a conversation about the timing or the process or anything like that. You're out running around.
I PDF them my buyer package. I PDF them my buyer package and tell them to review it. And it's very straightforward, very basic, not a huge dump of information. But I know from being a buyer that they just want to get out and look first. And once I get that antsiness out of them, I feel like I can have a better conversation with them because they've gotten that excitement, right? Of looking at a house for the first time.
Right. So there's no 100% right way, one or the other, to do it. There's, what have I got here? Who's speaking? Sorry, that is, oh, Denise is here too. That was Sherry. Okay. If I don't know them or their goals, I do a consult. Okay, so there's different ways to do it. If you are dealing with, strong referral clients, you might have a slightly different process. I'm going to suggest a system, and you can do what you want with it. Because one of the biggest challenges I find with realtors is that we are not necessarily consistent, if that is a fair statement to people. Okay, so when we're working with buyers, so if you don't have a really strong experience on working with buyers, then setting up a consult can be extremely powerful. And one of the challenges is that most realtors are being controlled by their buyers versus being in control of their buyers. Because there have been no boundaries set, and you haven't really set your parameters to show them that you are actually an expert versus a professional tour guide. So your consult could be by phone, your consult might be in person, but there should be, in my opinion, some things that are covered. Either if you're going to go out and look right away, that maybe you go and you look at 3, but then you go to Tim Hortons and you sit for 45 minutes and you do your consult at the end of the first couple of showings. But I don't think you should avoid the process. I think the question is when you do the process, okay? So in a consult, part of what you're talking about are different things, such as, what is the actual buying process? When are they actually going to need a deposit versus a down payment? Are they actually pre-approved in the sense, or did they do some online pre-approval, or did they actually submit NOAs and pay stubs because it's different? Okay. I called the 1-800 number for TD and they said, subject to verification, okay, but that's not a pre-approval. That's a, well, it would be nice if everything lines up and you don't actually owe income tax that you think you owe, then you qualify, okay? Or, you are actually in default of your child support payments, which you happen to not mention to the TD guy on the phone, okay? So that's a pre-approval requires documentation. So, what is the timing? What are the cost of inspections? Are you buying in the city? Are you buying out of the city? Are we budgeting for a sewer inspection? Are we budgeting for well and septic? Are we checking for every kind of thing in the water or just the stuff that'll kill me? Are we, so you could have between $1,500 and $2,000 in inspections. If I don't have you pre-qualified, you could be throwing that money down the toilet. What is the process? What do you actually need in your house versus what you want? You know, let's talk about traffic. Let's talk about driving. Let's talk about transportation. Let's talk about family, friends, where do they live? You want to buy an Eastern Passage and every single human you know lives in Timberley, they're never going to come visit you. You're going to be very lonely in your house. So, you know, when you have those conversations, you will stop showing 20 houses. You will stop showing 20 houses. In my personal opinion, and this is just my personal opinion, but as a buyer's agent, in the happy world, you will never show more than 5.
And having a wish list.
Having a wish list on Mark Andre said. So there's a difference between a wish list and a want list, or a want list and a need list. They're 2 totally different things. I need 3 bedrooms and a kitchen and 1.5 bath. I want 4 bedrooms. I need to be on a bus route. I want hardwood. I can put hardwood in. I can't add the bus route. Right? There's a big difference. Right? I don't like I like dark cabinets. Well, you can paint them or you can change them later, but I can't make the kitchen bigger because there's a wall here. Right? I have, you know, questions like, oh, you know, what's your family? Oh, well, do you have anybody with physical disabilities in your family? Well, actually, my grandmother comes over every weekend and she's 90. Okay, so maybe we don't want to have 30 steps up to the front door. Oh, God, I didn't think of that. Oh, you know, well, so these are the types of conversations that that 1 hour consultation will eliminate 20 showings if you do them. Okay, so Sherry's saying she has in her package and they fill it out. So you're doing it a different way. But the idea is what tends to happen is agents, because because clients have access to be online, clients are searching and they're saying, oh, I want to see this, and oh, I want to see this, and oh, I want to see this. And the agent goes, great, and they book them and they go out and there are terrible houses and they should never have gone there. And they're the wrong thing and they don't meet any of their needs, but the picture was shiny and sparkly. Meanwhile, you know that it's terrible or overpriced, and so why are you there? They are hiring you as a buyer's agent because you're providing value, you're providing expertise. You know, you're talking about property insurance, you're talking about life insurance versus mortgage insurance, you're talking about different mortgage options, you're talking about, you know, financial plan, here, talk to this person about this. That's how you become a quality buyer's agent, that they couldn't have Googled all of these things if they tried. They never would have followed the thread to find this information. Have I lost anybody there or do I have you all? Okay, so when you're doing it, the idea is that you are then, in a very positive way, you're not being combative, you're not being defensive, you are showing that buyer that yes, congratulations, you are capable of Googling pretty pictures of houses. But that's where I come in, is the but. And the list of things that I do that you can't Google are very long. I would recommend for everybody, I don't know if everybody knows this, but on CREA's website, you can download and share all the DIY videos from CREA, you know, the SWAT team and all that jazz. They're shareable. And so you can have those things about, you know, that are fun and funny. And there's also, NSAR has YouTube videos on RealtorLink on the DIY side of it as well, because that's CREA's theme for the last couple of years, and they're going to continue that. You know, there's the ad about the bikers, and there's the ad with the SWAT team, and you know, so those are fun things that you can do to show that you offer more. So if we go back to the original conversation, it was, does your seller presentation and does your buyer presentation do more than just hand them 3 sold, 3 expireds, and 3 actives? Does your buyer presentation do more than go, oh, you want to see it? It's pretty. Okay, let's go. If you're not doing more than that, or you're not adapting to this new mentality that the seller and the buyers have, then they are going to control you, and you're going to have a harder time closing the deal. Okay? So does anybody, so like, I mean, we only covered one area of consumer mentality, but I think it was a big one. I think it's like one of the biggest ones. Does anybody have any other questions on this, or any suggestions or other questions that you'd like us to talk about before we wrap up? Because I try not to keep you more than an hour. Does anyone know how many houses, like for them specifically, the buyers?
I do.
How many?
So do I. I'm just curious.
It's a stat you should track.
Yeah.
Okay. That's an excellent. Okay, well, tell me your number and I'll tell you.
11.
No, 11's good. Yeah. When so I'll give you an example. I've met, and okay, so I really hope I'm not saying anything against anyone on the line here, but I've been at functions and stuff and talking to peers and stuff, and they're like, oh my God, I'm so exhausted. I've been out working with this client. I swear we have literally gone to see 70 houses. Or I've gone to see 40 houses. Okay, well, I'm not even a penny an hour. So like at this time, so I mean, I think more than 15 is high. That's a personal opinion. I think it's different if you start in one vein. Like you might have a house hunting client and they thought they wanted, yeah, you might have a client who thought, house huntings are a little different. You might have someone who comes in and they're like, oh, I'm sure I want, Sackville because that's where all my friends are. And then they go and go, I don't like Sackville. And meanwhile, you showed them 10 houses in Sackville and now you shifted to Bedford. Okay, that's not quite the same thing as, yeah, it's an average. So my average is low, but everybody has a different process. But the end result is how many, and when we did the CGI, and we'll do another session on the CGI, is how many, so how many, first of all, how many buyers do you meet that write? So if that's the first metric that you need to measure, because that's your conversion rate, okay? So then that's really important because when we did our goal setting, that's relevant in terms of how many appointments do I need to hit my goal. So that's the number one metric. And if that conversion, so it's not about finding more buyers, it's about refining the system, or even from your seller, it's the same thing. How many sellers do I meet that hire me? It's understanding that conversion, because there's something, if I'm not getting them, there's something somebody else did that I didn't. So what am I not doing? It's not that you're not good. What do we need to add? Okay. So then if I get the buyer who says, Marc-Andre, you are the most awesome realtor. I can't wait for you to help me buy your house. Help me buy my house. That's what I meant. Yep. And then we go out and we look and we look and we look, and like 6 months later, you haven't written anything, but every other weekend we're out driving around, then something's been missed, and it's my responsibility as the realtor. That's my fault, right? Either I haven't had the come to who conversation with my buyers about what the heck are we doing and what do we actually want, or what's your timeline. The other thing that's important, and I get a lot of calls from agents about this, is in their buyer consult, they're not really talking about timing strongly enough, in my opinion. And so, are you in a lease? Do you have to sublet? What's your notice? When can you get out? How do we line this up? How do we do that? Because in some cases, you're out looking. I have a set of clients, they can't buy until June, and they in December wanted to go shopping, and I said nope, because there's absolutely nothing. I can't. That inventory won't be there. We can go at the end of February and start looking, March. But but generally speaking, like there's really no point. You can't. We've had a consult. We looked at what they like, all that kind of stuff. But the end result is that it's not a realistic expectation. They're in a lease. They're locked in. They're not prepared to sublet. They're not prepared for that risk. So there's not a whole lot we can do, right? So having those conversations about what that is, or you meet them and they find out that they didn't meet the time frame to actually give notice to get out of their lease. So yeah, their lease might end, but they didn't give 3 months notice, so they may or may not be able to get out. So that's where you provide value. And so tracking those metrics of how many people have I met that actually hire me, and then how many of them have I met that actually write. That's a different metric. So tracking that, and then I would also recommend that you track how many houses you have shown each person before they write, because that will tell you at how good you are at as a listener. To me, that's a test of your listening skills. How many times have you worked with a buyer who says, oh my gosh, I had worked with this person last time or this time or before I hired you or whatever, and I told them that I didn't want to be in X place, and all they did was take me to X place. We've all heard it. I don't think it's actually true. I don't think there's that many realtors that are doing that, but they took them to one thing they didn't like, and then suddenly everything that they took them was terrible. But it's a listening conversation, right? It's the same thing as, okay, this is again an opinion. I do not believe that if you're going to provide value as a buyer's agent, and we're going to get over that DIY mentality, that we should be yes men. So when you get a buyer that says, well, I won't have oil heat. I absolutely will not have oil heat. So we have a little chat about that, about the why and the pros and cons and what the options are and whatever. And in 99% of the time, they get over it, right? But if not, if you don't have that conversation and you are literally an order taker, then you will only show them houses with electric heat because that's what they told you, versus actually having a conversation and being the expert to ask them why. What is their concern? Maybe their concern has something to do with something that happened in the past or in another province that isn't even a legislative thing that happens here. So if you don't ask that question, you could have eliminated 50% of the houses that were the right house for them because of a concern that isn't even really a concern once you have the conversation and now they're happy with it. So if we're going to get over that DIY mentality, number one, we need to stop being order takers. And we need to be providing more value than just simply saying, yeah, you sent me 5 shiny houses that you saw on MLS. Okay, let's book those 5 shiny houses, versus having any input or any comment about, I know you picked this one and I think the other 4 are great, but I actually have some concerns about this particular one because I've tracked the history and it's been for sale for 5 years, so I'm concerned that if you bought it, you're never going to sell it, and da-da-da, or there's this, or you said you didn't want to do major work, but the windows are awful in this one, because we know, right? So those are the types of things that to me are relevant in overcoming this buyer-seller mentality of they know best. We can demonstrate without being rude or offensive that we actually provide value, assuming you're providing value, that is, right? Okay, any other questions or comments? Such a quiet group today. Okay, so it is 5 after 11, and I always try to promise to stay on time with you. So thank you very much. The class is recorded. Erin will put it up on Weebly for anybody that wants to listen again. And if you have any other questions or not sure what to do with any of this information we talked about, please reach out to me, and I will see you at the next session. Thanks, guys. Have a great day. I can't even see that now.